The silence in the delivery room was deafening. Where there should have been a newborn's cry, there was only heartbreak. Caitlin Miller never imagined that she would have to say goodbye before she even got to say hello. Welcome to It's Your Story to Tell, a podcast about resilience, healing, and hope. I'm your host, Megan Babcock, and today we're going to have a deeply moving episode with Caitlin Miller. She's here to share her journey through the unimaginable experience of 2 stillbirths and how she found the strength to keep going. Welcome, Caitlin. Thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me, Megan. I'm glad I can be here to share my story, and I hope I can be an inspiration to other women because I feel like this is a topic that's just not, talked about enough. So, yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, you are so welcome. And that's what this podcast is all about, is talking about the things that don't get talked about so that women can see that there's hope for their story, that there's resources out there to help them navigate it. I would love if you would just take us back to the moment you realized something was wrong in your pregnancy. What was that experience like? And how did you just move through that period of grief and loss?
The first time that I became pregnant, I was 23. I had my baby when I was 24. It was a very wanted pregnancy. It was pretty uncomplicated for the most part at first, and I had kind of had this feeling, though, from the beginning that something wasn't right. And, I was having bad dreams that, bad things were happening to my baby. And, I really didn't have anybody to talk to about that with because I feel like it was just kind of brushed off like, oh, you're just overwhelmed, or, you're just paranoid, everything's fine. In the beginning, at least back then, I know they offered like genetic screening and stuff. And there was like a 12-week ultrasound that they would do, but it was a screening ultrasound. And at that time, insurance didn't always cover that. I think nowadays they do more, but so I had refused like all the genetic screening because in my mind, I thought, it didn't matter if there was a problem. I would still keep my baby and love her just the same. It was at the 3D ultrasound I had. I was around 17 weeks pregnant, and the sonographer that was doing the test was kind of like had this weird look on her face, and it just seemed like I could just tell something was wrong, but she wouldn't, she didn't say anything, and she kind of acted like there was something wrong with the 3D part, and so she turned the 3D off, except I could see that there was something. I could see there was like a big kind of bubble like on the back of the baby's neck. And just being in nursing, I wasn't a labor and delivery nurse or anything, but I've seen ultrasounds before, and I understood kind of what was fluid and what wasn't. And so to me, in my mind, it looked like there was a big pocket of fluid back there that shouldn't have been there. I knew it wasn't normal, but I was still kind of in denial, and I thought, well, she'll probably reach out to my doctor and let them know if there's a problem. So I expected to get a call from my doctor's office saying, we need to come see it, there's a problem or whatever. But nobody ever did. And I thought, well, maybe that was normal. Maybe there really wasn't anything wrong with the baby. And then as more time went on, I started to notice like there was one day where like I wasn't feeling any movement at all. And I thought, wow, this is really weird. So I did all the things I tell you to do when you don't feel movement, drink orange juice and stuff like that. But I had an ultrasound the following day. So I was like, oh, we'll just go to the ultrasound. I'm sure everything will be fine. I'm just paranoid. It's my first pregnancy, whatever. Then we get to the ultrasound, and they did discover that there was no heartbeat. And even though I had this gut feeling that something was wrong, it was still such a shock, like such a devastating like gut punch shock, like I had never experienced anything like that before. And so they sent us home. They said, just go home, process everything that's going on, sleep on it, and then call us tomorrow and let us know if you're ready to come in and we'll induce you so you can have the baby. And so that's what we did. But obviously, I didn't get any sleep that night. And I was so grief stricken that I couldn't even talk. Like physically, I couldn't speak. And I had to email my boss to tell her what was happening. I couldn't come into work and I needed time off. And it was, it was just, I mean, it was surreal. Like it was just a feeling that I never really knew was possible for humans to feel. So we went to the hospital and they induced labor, but it was obvious that they weren't used to that. Like it was a small, community hospital. It was obvious they didn't really see a whole lot because typically they would have referred to, maternal fetal medicine. But like I said, we didn't know anything was wrong because I didn't do any of the genetic screenings. When they induced, they didn't give me enough of the medication to really start the labor process. So I ended up being in the hospital for 3 days because just trying to get the labor started. But by the grace of God, we had a maternal fetal medicine resident happen to be on call that last night that we were there. And he was like, I don't understand why you're still here. You should have been home yesterday. He's like, they're not giving you near enough of the dose of the medication that you need. Because I wasn't full term. I was 5 months into the pregnancy, and he's like, your body needs more medication to induce labor than somebody who is full term. So he got the ball rolling, and a few hours later, I had the baby, and he said, it looks like the baby was a girl, and it looks like she probably has Turner syndrome, but we won't know for sure until we do some testing. So that's what they did. And then we found out a few weeks later that she did have Turner syndrome. Going back to like my postpartum visit, it was very like they kind of dismissed all of my grief as just normal grief. Oh, you just have to get over it. You just need time to work through your grief and you'll be fine. Even though I was like having suicidal thoughts, I couldn't get out of bed. Every waking moment I was crying. They said you'll probably leak a little bit of milk, but they didn't tell me that I was going to become so engorged that I couldn't even put my arms down to my sides. So I was trying to deal with that by myself. I remember calling my doctor's office and they answered the phone and I couldn't speak. Words wouldn't come out of my mouth. And so I hung up the phone and I was just thinking, what am I going to do? I had never been pregnant before. I had never experienced lactation or anything like that. So, and to be honest, at that point in my life, I really hadn't been around anybody who was lactating. I wasn't really familiar with what to expect. And so that was like a whole nother aspect of the trauma, that I was trying to work through. And I ended up having to go back to work, you know, 3 weeks after the birth. It might have been 4 because my boss was kind enough to give me an extra week, but I wasn't anywhere near ready to go back to work. And, I was working the floor with other nurses who were pregnant, and that was really hard because we were all kind of due around the same time. And they were all pregnant with girls too. It was just another layer onto the grief that I still hadn't really worked through. And my doctor's office just kind of said this postpartum depression screening doesn't pertain to you. You just have grief you need to work through. Um, we're not going to, give you any medication, or gave me no recommendations on how to, process it or work through it. They sent me back to work way earlier than I was ready to, just because they said I physically could. And then I get to work and I'm surrounded by people who don't understand, and, they come off with comments that aren't helpful. Um, like, oh, well, at least you can get pregnant, or you're young, you can always try again, you know, just things like that that just aren't helpful. Or, oh, there was probably, something wrong and it was probably that, for the best anyway. The baby wouldn't have had quality of life. God needed, another angel, things like that that just aren't helpful.
It's hard, and that's one of the important things as we're talking is for people to think about the things that we say and trying to comfort. Because I've had other people who have had deaths and loss in spouses or children. And this is a very common part of the conversation where they're struggling so much, and you can recognize, that they're trying to help, but it's not helpful.
Mhm.
What do you think would have been helpful in that moment? What could somebody have done versus saying some of those things to be there and support you?
Honestly, I think I just needed validation. I think if somebody would have just held space for me and said, like, I'm so sorry, like, I can't imagine what you're going through, or I wish I could take the pain away. I wish there was something I could do, but I'm here for you to, if you need to talk. Honestly, I think that would have been a tremendous help. It would have meant the world to me. Or even just say, no baby could replace the one you lost. Just validate that feeling for me would have been very helpful.
Thank you for sharing that, because I think that our intent can be so good. Come
Mm-hmm.
alongside someone and try to help them to feel better. But it's really hard to sit with people in that
Mm-hmm.
grief. And I think that's where people struggle. And
Mm-hmm.
and just even asking, how could I help you? How could I come alongside of you? And you may not
Mm-hmm.
have even known how, but just the fact that they're willing to try to meet you where you're at, or
Mm-hmm.
giving you that opportunity to say, I could just use a hug right now. I just need a place to
Yeah.
cry, would be a better response than trying to make them feel better when there is nothing that can make someone feel better in that moment, and
Mm-hmm.
validating how difficult and unimaginable that something like that could be. So I hope
Mm-hmm.
that's helpful for our listeners, because
Yeah,
it is so hard to walk with people
it is.
through these really dark places, and you can have the best
Mm-hmm.
intent and cause more problems with what we say.
Exactly. Yeah. And I in no way thought anybody had malicious intent. I know that their intentions were good, but it just wasn't helpful and almost just made the isolation worse. But it's a good point that you made with just asking, what do you need? Is there anything I can do, to help you in any way? Um, just simply saying that or asking that question rather than, oh, well, at least you can get pregnant. Well, God needed another angel, because the truth is, there's really nothing you can say that's really going to make the sadness or grief go away. But just feeling like you're important enough to somebody to want to be there for you.
Yeah. And your providers, you mentioned this, but it feels like there just wasn't the resources. They didn't have the understanding to help with the emotional aspect of this loss.
Mm-hmm.
They had dealt with the physical. They didn't think you needed medication, but they didn't equip you with ways to process or
Mm-hmm.
referrals to other types of services.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is one of the things, as we're nurse coaches and recognizing areas within our healthcare system that need improvement, is
Mm-hmm.
that we forget that we are mind, body, spirit, and
Mm-hmm.
they're looking from their lens of clinically, this,
Mm-hmm.
you should be fine. Yes, you're checked off. You can go back to work. But they forgot about the whole other pieces of you as a whole person. And how could somebody in the medical field, your provider, a nurse in that clinic, like, what would have been helpful for you in that grief, in that everything that you were trying to process? How could they have supported you better?
I think if they would have listened better when I'm telling them that I having thoughts of wanting to die every single day that I wake up and I go to bed praying that God won't wake me up the next morning, they just kind of brush it off as, well, but do you have a plan? No, I don't necessarily have a plan. Then it's just grief. Like, and at that time, the only thing I could think of that was helpful was medication, like antidepressants. I didn't even really think about counseling necessarily, but if somebody would have said, I think you would really benefit from seeing a counselor, let me refer you, that would have been great. But they didn't even do that. But looking back and where I'm at now, I wouldn't want medication if I didn't really need it. So if they would have said, let's not jump right to medication yet, let's have you see a therapist and let you work with them for a little bit, and then we'll, reevaluate and see where you're at.
What I find is healthcare providers often, because they don't understand or know other options, they just can't really speak to them. And so how powerful it is when we can help educate the healthcare system as to a holistic approach. And we're going to pause here and we're going to pick up in part 2 and talk a little bit more about how you are using your story and the journey that you went through to now fill a gap within the healthcare system. You've been able to turn your pain into purpose, and you're able to help other mothers who are walking this same difficult path. So thanks for being here with me, and I look forward to our audience hearing about what you're doing to make a difference in the world through your really tragic circumstances that you went through.
Yeah, thank you.